Hello and welcome to the Photography and Video Show podcast. I'm your host, David McClelland, and in this month's show we lean quite heavily into smartphone photography and video. Photographic artist, award-winning smartphone photographer and best-selling author Jo Bradford talks us through her philosophy and her work.
And I was the most analog person ever, so I would never want to put them anywhere publicly, but I was persuaded to stick some of them on Instagram and rapidly actually picked up a really huge Instagram following for the time. What I thought was, smartphone photos, having 100 felt like huge to me, that it accelerated really quickly. And so I stopped being ashamed of being a smartphone photographer and tried to kind of engage with this idea of smartphone photography.
We also look at the latest kit announcements and dissect the recent scary fast shot on iPhone Apple event. Joining us to do this is award-winning photographer, DoP editor and nice anarchist. It's Jim Marks, everyone. Hello, Jim. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, David. Lovely to be here. Thank you.
Give us the Jim Marks 101.
Oh, my God. First of all, I'm very old. Let's be clear. I've been in this industry, been lucky enough to be in it for over 3 decades.
Wow.
Which is a mighty amount of time. And I'm very grateful. I love it. You can split my career actually in two. You can say the first half was photography, the second half was filmmaking. My career's always been about change. And I mean that in a positive way. Technological change, client change, delivery change. I started with film. I went to labs. I did clip tests. I bought stuff. I pushed and pulled my exposures. I had roll film. I loved that heritage. And
it was a very manual process then, which we'll be talking about later on with our feature guests.
Yeah, hugely manual, but also hugely social, because we'd all meet in the pub waiting for our film around the corner from the lab, and there was the assistants all knew each other, and I was lucky to assist some great people, and it was a very vibrant photographic scene. And then, of course, we had the massive shifts, whether it's the internet, digital, and now film, obviously, and the way media's changed and the way it's consumed. So the last 30 years have been quite busy, but I enjoy that.
Well, this qualifies you well. This is the Photography and Video Show podcast. You tick both of those boxes amply. In terms of your recent work, just help us to tune into the sort of projects that you get involved in and the roles that you play in them.
Well, it kind of splits. I mean, I kind of go into it now with very much a filmmaking approach. If without wanting to offend any photographers, photography is a day off. Okay, photography is easy. Okay, and I know they're probably throwing something at the screen now. It can be one bag, it can be one light, it can be fixed in post. Okay, but I love photography. I love what it offers. But filmmaking has a completely different set of challenges. You have to make a story, even if it's 8 seconds long. Yeah. You have social media. You have a beginning, a middle, and end. You have the whole joy of audio. Then you have the editing process, which can be both torturous and beautiful. So you've got all of that stuff. But there are loads of skills that a photographer does bring to filmmaking and vice versa. It's a two-way street.
So if you agree with Jim that photography is a day off, then great. If you vehemently disagree, then we'll be finding out what Jim's handles on social media are later on. But Jim, thank you for setting us up. So let's take a look at what's been happening in the news over the last few weeks. Now, these days, November is, somewhat dominated by Black Friday and Cyber Monday sales, exclusive deals, double cashback, triple discount, all the rest of that. Retailers and manufacturers obviously trying to shift their stock before the end of the year, and that can mean that news is a little bit thin on the ground, but not necessarily this year. Jim, there's been a few bits and bobs that have risen to the top of my news bag over the last few weeks. Sony has been releasing lots of cameras this year. The A9 III, which the headline specs there, it can shoot at 1/80,000th of a second shutter speed. And the bit that I want to have a chat with you about here, Jim, is world's first, big rabbit's ears I'm giving there, full frame global shutter sensor. Now, I know that you have your feet in the Fujifilm camp there, so let's kind of park the Sony bit to one side. But from the development of digital videography when it comes to cameras like the A9 and many others as well. Just talk me through the importance of the full frame and in particular the global shutter bit there, because that's what Sony seems to be going to market on, or at least lots of journalists have been picking up on. How important is it really to have that? What difference is that going to enable, if any, to creatives?
Global shutter or shutter readout in all its forms, you're right, it's become more important as videos sort of come up, and you can see it sometimes, but it can be overstated, and there are many ways to skin a cat and ways to approach this. I mean, there are certainly subjects and kind of material that global shutter is very useful for. Very fast-moving sport, for instance. And there are things where sensor readouts, certainly in the past, especially on large format or big cameras, have been slow. And so you might shoot a high resolution, sort of 6K, 8K, and you might have a slower processor in a camera. And, you know, if you're doing a lot of whip pans, you can see that sort of jelloed effect in a conventional sensor, in a CMOS sensor. You can see the movement, and that can be distracting. That's absolutely a fact. Now, a global shutter, because obviously it's reading it in an instantly, you don't get that. But there can be a dynamic price to pay. There's no such thing as a free lunch with any camera. No. So it's a balance, isn't it? I'll tell you one quick thing about sensor readouts that I really noticed. When they launched the new GFX Mark II, you know, the large format sensor camera. Which
Andrew was talking about that. And you getting hands-on with that a couple of months ago.
And previously for video, you know, you might say, actually, the readout on that sensor, because it's massive, is too slow. But in 4K narrative on that camera, it's 15 milliseconds, which is exactly the same as the previous A1. So what we're seeing with all manufacturers is increased processor speed, more grunt under the hood, and a better application of that grunt on the sensors to give you those faster readouts. I welcome all innovation from all manufacturers. When I think of what I spent on old red cameras, I'm going back like 12 years, the amount of money that we spent to get something now that your phone can do in a superior way 10 years later. I mean, that's the sheer progress, you know, and also affordability, because a lot of the features and the readout speeds and the stuff that we can now do with our cameras, they are affordable in relative terms. You know, we're not paying what we paid 10 or even 5 years ago. You know, XS20, 1,200 quid. It's got 6K oversample sensor. There is all sorts of advantages that then trickle down from your highline camera, from your, you know, flagship hero camera. You know, and it's just picking. I think it's very much for the photographer or the filmmaker to try and pick the correct brand with the correct feature set that works for your work.
So just to expand on that a little bit, I was away this week in Frankfurt, of all places, having peak Christmas as we're recording on the 1st of December right now. We had snow in Frankfurt. There's an amazing Christmas market out there. Basically, Christmas is already done and it's the 1st of December for me. But with my in front of the camera work, the videographer who I was working with was shooting with a Fujifilm. And
there you go.
That is not usual, Jim. I'm going to say it. Usually it is either with a Sony camera on the shoulder, or it's going to be something like a Panasonic GH5 or a Sony A7 or something like that. You know, we've seen the kind of event stuff, and even broadcast as well these days, let's face it, move to smaller and smaller and mirrorless cameras and hybrid cameras and so on. But I haven't seen Fujifilm so much in that space. Why do you think that has been? Is it just down to choice? Is it down to perception? Is it down to, well, if I'm a jobbing videographer and everyone else is using an A7 or whatever it is, then just to fit in and make sure that the stuff that I'm shooting will cut in with what they're doing, will match nicely in post, then I will get the same as them? What kind of reasons are there, do you think? And are they really valid reasons now?
I mean, it began with the XH2S, the very fast sensor readout camera. And then from that camera, we've had the XH2 and the XS20, and then obviously the GFX. Fuji have, like many manufacturers, seen that the growth in the need for for video features drives the market, drives the technology, drives where they should be. I mean, one of the nice things about Fuji, you remember they made film? We go back to my old
Clues
world.
in the name.
Yeah, they made film, and they've taken all of those films and made film simulations. So you have Provia, you have Astia, and you in the new GFX you have Reala. These new simulations, and they work in video. So I mean, absolutely, as you said, it's great to see them making inroads into that market, being used. I think a lot of it is down to the great color, and the features, particularly on that smaller XH2S. It's got an incredibly fast sensor readout. We talked about global shutter. The rolling shutter on that is very, very low. It's literally unnoticeable. It's got ProRes internal, so if you want a decent codec inside that's recognized by any edit NLE, ProRes, you've got that. You've got H.265, 10-bit 422, CFast Type B, all of the standard stuff that a lot of manufacturers are doing, but with, I like to say, that Fujifilm twist, because they do tend to do things a little differently. You think about the 100V, you think about the large format, they tend to slightly go their own way, which is quite fun.
Moving on to our next item of news, we've also seen only a couple of weeks ago Kodak bringing to life a new Super 8 limited edition camera. Did you ever shoot on Super 8, Jim?
I have played around with Super 8 in my youth. I think it's brilliant they've done it. I know they announced this like 5 years ago, and everyone's been going, is it vaporware or will it actually exist? I'm pleased to see it. I think it's a really fun thing. I think the price is a bit, it's like
$5,000.
Yeah, with a mini HDMI or USB at the back, which is like, hang on, can we have a decent...
That is from 5 years ago.
Yeah, I know, that is. Maybe they designed it then and forgot to update it. But joking aside, it's really fun to see. I think there's a lot to be learnt in terms of craft from something that is very finite with film. There's a limit. It's a bit like going back to 36 frames or 12 on a roll. You have to really consider your choices of when you turn, when you take a picture, because it's expensive and it is a very finite medium. But there's a lovely quality to it, and it's a really interesting camera. I can't wait to try it or see it. I think it's quite a fun thing to look at, definitely.
You talk about the economy of shooting stills on a roll. When you're shooting film on a roll, you really do have to learn economy. You need to get your shots right. You need to be very
and don't forget
purposeful about what you're shooting.
I got told a horror story actually yesterday by someone about some students who shot a whole load of film and never checked the gate on the camera.
Oh, check the gate! Check the gate!
So they put the camera down on the carpet, and then they went back and they discovered, to their horror when they developed it, that it was covered in lines of hairs. It's a craft, and like anything finite, it teaches you about the art of when to push the red button, and what do you really need to make your story, and it's just a really fun thing to have. I think even instant cameras, you've only got a certain amount within there, and that means you have to edit in a different way. You have to shoot in a different way. You can't just fill a memory card up and put another one in. I'm all for that, but I actually think it makes you a better shooter.
You mentioned that term, check the gate. I've only been involved in one film job closely involved in one film job that was shot on film, and we're going back to the mid-2000s. It was actually an advert or a promo right in the very early days of internet video, or social sharing of video, for a Sony PlayStation game. It was on the Sony PlayStation 2, Buzz the Mega Quiz, and that was shot on film in a flat somewhere in trendy East London. After every shot, it's almost as though the crew was crossing their fingers, and there was that shout, check the gate. It's like, right, everyone cross your fingers just to make sure that shot was good. And just that kind of sense of danger after every take was really palpable throughout the whole day.
Yeah. I mean, could you imagine if today's generation of photographers couldn't see what they'd got until they went to a lab? I think we'd all have a collective breakdown.
Just to cover off a couple of bits of news in brief, and then we'll chat with Jo Bradford, our feature guest this week, about smartphone photography. Canon has announced what I think it was James Arteas on Digital Camera World said is meet the Trinity Buster. Obviously, Canon has been releasing a whole new load of lenses since the R system came out just over 5 years or so ago now, and it's a very impressive looking 24 to 105, great focal length at f2.8 with a zoom capability built in as well. That looks like it's going to be very high on many people's Christmas lists this year. We spoke earlier this season with Boris Eldagson about his controversial work, The Electrician, Pseudomnesia, The Electrician, to give it its full title. I was delighted to hear from Boris a few weeks ago, and the exhibition that he spoke about on the podcast has come to bear. So unfortunately, I wasn't able to make it over to Germany to see his exhibition, but the work that he created that did win the creative category of the Sony World Photography Awards earlier this year, The Electrician, went on sale for €20,000 in Paris. I don't know if anyone has picked it up, but if you were a fan of Boris's work, maybe get in touch with the gallery in Paris. And also something we touched on last month when we were chatting with Peter Dench is about authenticity in a world of AI images. And we saw that Sony and Associated Press are on a mission to tackle fake images once again with in-camera authentication of images. And we say, like I say, Leica's also been doing some work in this area as well, and there does seem to be some other moves by other makers throughout the workflow also that somebody somewhere in the workflow can go, was this created by a camera? Can I trust it? And particularly when we're talking about journalism, photojournalism and so on, does that become important? On this authenticity piece and the way that we're seeing generative AI become more and more a part of our workflows or potentially, should we say, available as part of our workflows in our visual work. How is this sitting with you at the moment? Do you find yourself using some of these tools at the moment to augment your creativity, or are you still of the camp that, no, I need to be creating it myself? Whereabouts are you?
Well, really interesting topic. The first thing I will say is that I'm all for authenticity in camera. I think a standard, I think Adobe has created this standard or something. I think it's a good idea. I don't think it's a bad idea. I think it's a good idea. I think it helps. I think if we can have something on everyone's frame that says a human being made this, I can't see the downside. I think that's a positive thing. AI generally, well, we fall, don't we, between the dystopian, it's the end of days, there'll be no work, Elon Musk, and is it a useful tool? I think it's a bit of both. I remember what the internet did to photography as a business. And I remember how suddenly there were enormous libraries available of images for very little money. And working photographers struggled because where you might be commissioned to go and shoot something, or actually I can buy that in a library for 2 pence, I'll do that, or I'll get it free. Yes. And that really impacted photography. And I think AI has the potential to do that to all media, be it photography, video, content, or adverts. I think you can't stop it, sadly, but I think you can put in place strategies like authentication and also perhaps business practices for individuals to kind of mitigate it.
Jim, thank you very much indeed for now. We'll press pause on the news there for a moment and switch over to this month's feature. Jo Bradford is an award-winning photographic artist and best-selling author. Her books on smartphone photography have been part of a movement over the last decade that's helped shape the perception of smartphone cameras as serious creative tools. Jo, when I look at your work, I'm immediately drawn to the application and your sensitivity to colour. Can you describe your approach, your philosophy behind colour?
In my other part of my photographic career, I work in a colour darkroom still to this day, and I'm very interested in the way light and colour perform and the way they can be recorded on light-sensitive material, but also on not just light-sensitive substrates like I find in my darkroom, but also the sensor on your camera is another way of recording light and colour. And I've always been fascinated with the work of colour theorists like Josef Albers and the way the sort of Bauhaus taught photographers to work in shape and form. So applying those kind of colour theory things to the way shape and form is, I think, is essentially what makes a good photo. I kind of feel like each opportunity to make a piece of work is a way of thinking about the artistic things that go with making pictures rather than just snapping and snatching images and walking away. So thank you for noticing.
Well, I go to the front page of your website and we'll put a link to that in the show notes. And I mean, right at the top, photographic artist there. It's not, well, you tell me, I'm not seeing one palette of colour there, for example. It's not as though you focus on pastels necessarily. I'm seeing some really vibrant blues, lots of greens, lots of reds here as well. Do you find yourself drawn to a particular set of colours, a particular feel, a particular aesthetic, or is it really a celebration of whatever colours come to you in context?
I think I used to find that I made most of my work in blues and greens. I'm very drawn to the colours of nature. But recently I've been enjoying kind of pushing myself outside of my comfort zone and making the colour work that you're talking about is work that I sell in galleries. I've got representation in London and Paris, and the work that sort of sells well to buyers of fine art through fine art galleries is kind of dependent on what they're kind of looking to buy in their home. So I feel like if I spent too much time thinking about what the audience wanted, it would be really difficult. So I try to just make work based around colours that inspire me. So quite often I have a huge window in my studio and I'm very high up on Dartmoor where I live off grid, and I have this opportunity to watch the light change in the evenings and change from blues and greens on the landscape to these kind of reds and warm orange tones and yellows and so on. So I think that I kind of end up making work depending on what I've seen out of my window for the last few weeks. But when I'm in my darkroom, I'm recording coloured lights. So I filter away the lights that I don't need out of the visible white light spectrum. And then just those images that you're looking at on my website are literally just the record of certain colours. And I can kind of mask one in and mask another one out physically with my hands and bits of card to make colours change. So it's a very physical thing. My interaction with colour happens on a very physical level in a pitch black darkroom with no other light apart from what's happening in my enlarger. On
our video call right now, as you were mentioning looking out over Dartmoor where you're based, I could see you kind of looking out of your window there. But I know that Dartmoor's where you're based now, but that wasn't where you were raised. You were raised in South Africa. Do you find the colours from that part of your life still have an influence? Because I imagine it's a different colour palette there than what you experience now.
It really is. The African colour palette is far more autumnal, sort of browns and reds and warmer tones to the Dartmoor colour scheme that I have. So I feel like I do lurch between the two from time to time. And I wear a lot of warm colours these days. I went through a phase of wearing all black all the time for ages, and now I'm really enjoying dressing more like my African childhood again, with lots of bright reds and warm tones, because all the colours of clothing are dyed in such warm, vibrant ways in African culture. So I feel like it's a big mishmash of all the parts of me put together to make me the person I am now.
And speaking of mishmash, as you put it, not me, it does seem as though there are different processes that you go through. It's not an artist, it's a photographic artist. It's not just capturing pictures. You have an element of processing and masking, as you describe it there. So it is kind of bringing together different media, treating them in different ways, feeling very manual. This is really important to you, I take it.
It is. I think with photography, the medium has so much potential, and you can make so much work in ways that are unexpected and creative and unique. And I feel like often when people just think about the camera on its own, that can be almost limiting in a way. So thinking about what the medium of photography can do in general, if you take in all of the analog aspects of photography, which is something that I'll be talking about at the photography show on the analog stage this year, it's just looking at the way analog processes can be explored to give you something else from the photographic medium other than just what you get from lens-based work. So I think for me, process is fascinating. It's returning as often as I can to that original magic of being taught to make photos in a darkroom as a very small child, and understanding the way that the light would make this image appear, and the kind of emotional feeling that you would have from seeing a picture appear out of the darkness onto a sheet of paper. So I feel like my process-driven work is very much about exploring those same ideas and searching for those same feelings that I always had as a starter out in photography many years ago.
And like you say, that process is what you'll be describing some of at the photography show in March. And it just occurs to me, do you feel as though we've seen, and the photography show is just one reflection of this, but we see it elsewhere as well, this almost a return to manual. We've seen a lot of analog, a lot of film photography returning. Do you feel as though in a way this is a response to the fact that digital photography is almost moving in the opposite direction with all of the amazing autofocus, computational photography, everything that modern digital cameras can do, that with every action there's a reaction, and this manual process, getting manually into the art again, is some kind of artistic balance?
I think it really is. I have a new Fujifilm GFX 50S2, which I absolutely love, and will spend many a happy hour out in my local woodland photographing scenes around me, and absolutely adore the pristine, wonderful, clean, digitally perfect photographs that camera takes. I love it, and I love the photos that my phone takes as well, my iPhone. But on the other side of things, there's something about that kind of the balance of being in touch with photography in all its forms that I feel like I can't let go of. I'm just a fan of photography in every single way that it exists. And so you'll happily find me making cyanotypes one day, or working in my colour darkroom another, and then taking one of my digital cameras out. And I've also got like an old couple of Olympus Pen FT half-frame cameras that I shove. I've got a black and white film permanently in one and a colour film in the other, and they're always in my handbag. So I'm always out and about with some form of camera, engaging with photography in some form.
You mentioned that your smartphone is one of the cameras that you go out shooting with there, Jo. And of course, this is another part of your journey over the last few years that you've explored very publicly. And in fact, you've published a number of books, including one very recently in this area. So tell me about how the smartphone part of your journey began and where it's taken you since.
In 2013, when I was pregnant with my daughter, it would have been wildly inappropriate to be spending time in a darkroom mixing up chemistry, and having given birth as well, I was in the same situation. So I felt like I still was out wanting to take photographs every day, and it felt important that I did keep being creative. For me, having my camera phone in my pocket at all times was just a way of, to start with, taking sketches of things in my mind. So we'd go out for walks, my baby and I, and out on the moor, and I'd think this place would be great to come back with one of my medium format cameras and rephotograph. So I'll take a picture with my phone for now and have it as a sketchbook of places to come back to when the opportunity presents itself. And over time, I would show friends my photos on my phone. And I was the most analog person ever, so I would never want to put them anywhere publicly. But I was persuaded to stick some of them on Instagram, and rapidly actually picked up a really huge Instagram following for the time. What I thought was, smartphone photos, having 100 felt like huge to me, that it accelerated really quickly. And so I stopped being ashamed of being a smartphone photographer and tried to kind of engage with this idea of smartphone photography. So my smartphone photography specific Instagram account is at Green Island Studios, and I just post pictures of Dartmoor there, and everything on that Instagram is just photos taken with my phone. And it's kind of had a loyal following for such a long time now that I feel that that's very much part of who I am. It's part of my DNA as a photographer, that the smartphone is a way of me engaging with photography whenever the whim takes me. I never have to miss a second of wanting to take pictures, because I've always got some form of camera, and my smartphone is very much an important part of my arsenal, as it were.
I think there was a real realisation, you mentioned there in the early 20-teens, there was a real realisation that the smartphone isn't just a make-do camera. This can be used for professional work, professional creativity, whether that's photography, videography, journalism, content creation in the broader sense. And there was a real movement. It was such a fantastic time to be part of that community, and seeing likes of Brendan O'Shea, for example, over in Ireland, and so on, and yourself creating and also building up such a following, leveraging platforms like Instagram. Where do you feel as though we are now? Because we're some 10 years on from that awakening, I think, do you see them in the same area, the same category as maybe smaller digital cameras? Or do you still think there is a real uniqueness about what they are capable of, about the feel of the output that they produce?
Let's say, for example, one of the little Sony XR100s and, those other small cameras that are also really easy to slip into your pocket and a lovely extra thing to have in your arsenal. The difference between them, of course, is the phone itself has a lot of algorithms and computational photography attached to it that you see less of with the kind of pocket cameras, the small digicams and so on. So I think it has a different place because it provides a different kind of image. But for me, I kind of just think of it as another tool in my box, and the one that will come out if I haven't made the effort to go out with a big camera and specifically look for images. A lot of stuff that I photograph is incidental, things that I just see in my day-to-day life. And so that's the perfect camera for that part of the job. But interestingly, my new book, Viewpoint, is the kind of premise for writing that or putting that book together when I approached publishers about that one. It's my first not how-to book. And the reason why I wanted to make that was to say that I feel like we're at a point in our history as in photography that the smartphone is now indistinguishable photographically. The images from smartphones, should I say, are somewhat indistinguishable from other forms of photographic devices or photographic cameras. And I kind of had found a large collection of photographers whose work is absolutely stunning. Brendan O'Shea is one of them that you mentioned earlier, and had sort of said to my publisher, is there any chance I could make a kind of just a book that shows a collective view of the world through smartphone photography taken by amazing photographers all over the globe? And the idea here being that you would not look at any of these pictures and think they were taken on a phone. They just look like any other beautiful collection of images that you might find in a book, in an art gallery bookshop or so on. So it ended up being something that I was super proud to make. I have 54 contributors in that book, and when you flick through the pages of it, it's hard to believe that these people are just working with phones. And I say just as if that's in some form diminishing what phones can do, but it just shows that any tool in the right hands can be used to great effect.
I think we've spoken about this on the show before, about the different feel that you get when you're interacting with a smartphone. It's a device that we kind of, irrespective of whether it's got a camera or not, we carry one around with us every day. We feel comfortable with it. We're used to cracking open the camera and doing a selfie or filming ourselves or doing a FaceTime call or whatever it is. So what I find interesting here about the storytelling that you were looking to tap into, the intimacy that you're looking to tap into with Viewpoint, the smartphone kind of creates it facilitates that intimacy. And certainly when you are going and filming an interview with a contributor, if you're turning up with a hulking great big ENG camera and lighting and microphone and sound, you're going to get a very different contribution to the one that you would get if you are filming on a smartphone. And maybe that plays into the type of conversations that you are facilitating with Viewpoint.
I think it's really interesting that when I was pitching this book, one of the ideas that the publishers pricked their ears up about was the idea that in the past we're so used to seeing photographs of places that are not our own homes, that as a kind of view taken by perhaps wealthy Western photographers who can kind of turn up at these places with their big expensive cameras. And we often see the world through this kind of particular viewpoint, which is quite Western centric and elitist in that people that can afford that kind of technology. And one of the things I liked about the idea of taking photos shot on phones is it was far more democratic, that there's a wider section of the global community that have access to that particular camera. And a lot of the photographers in the book aren't shooting on particularly modern or high-spec cameras at all, but they're still producing really interesting work. But the idea that I was collecting stories told by the people in the places where they live, their own daily lives, shot in the same way that I shoot my daily life, just seeing something of interest and taking that picture, capturing moments with families, political changes in the world, and beautiful artistic stories, and some people who are making kind of conceptual art, and others that are looking at stories about migration or refugees, all these different things that are coming together in this way, and people are using their phones to connect with those stories because it just feels more personal, more intimate and more immediate. So for all of those reasons, I think the phone definitely has a place in the canon.
Right tool for the right job. And I guess my final question is if you are going out for a walk on your beloved Dartmoor, how do you decide what the right tool is for a given feel that you have that you want to create something?
I guess, if I'm honest, I'll usually have 2 or 3 cameras with me if I have the opportunity. So I'll always know that my phone is there because I'll take it with me for lots of other reasons other than just taking photos. And there are times when things are happening quickly that I'll always reach for my phone, because in that instant, the fleeting moments can only be captured with something that doesn't require a lot of setup. And obviously with your phone and having that access to the camera on the home screen, you don't even have to unlock it to be able to engage the camera. That means it's always at the ready. But at the same time, I'll happily go out with my GFX 50, the Fujifilm medium format camera that I love, to go and get large photographs of trees and landscapes and things like that, because I know the detail will be amazing, and it's got the most fantastic image stabilization in that camera, so I can shoot at really, really low light situations in the woodlands and handhold kind of late in the day. So I'll tend to take those 2 out with me. They're my 2 favorite cameras to go wandering around the moor with. One slightly heavier than the other, but they both fit comfortably in my backpack and my pocket. So yeah, I'll start with those 2 because they cover both ends of the spectrum.
Jo, so amazing to hear about your creative process, and I can't wait to hear more about it at the photography show in March.
Looking forward to being there.
And a big thanks to Jo Bradford. We'll put details of that new book, Viewpoint Human Stories Through the Smartphone Lens, in the show notes. Jim, Jo clearly does a lot of photography shot on iPhone. Actually, I didn't ask her what smartphone she used, and I don't really think it mattered too much to her. Shot on iPhone rose to the top of conversation again, but from a videography and a filmography point of view a few weeks ago at Apple's latest product launch, its Scary Fast launch, where it unveiled the new M3 processors in its new MacBooks and iMacs. I have one. I went and bought one of those MacBook Pros a couple of weeks ago now with an M3 processor in there, but that's for a different podcast, not for this one. But right at the end, and if you're one of those people who likes to stay behind and watch the credits roll, people noticed, as did I, to be fair. I was there and I tweeted it straight away, even though it was a midnight showing here in the UK, shot on iPhone. And this was the first that we're aware of, anyway, of one of these glossy Apple product launch videos that said it was shot on iPhone. Now, shot on iPhone has been a program, a campaign for many years that Apple has gone to market with in big billboards on the London Underground and elsewhere as well, of the still images that it is capable to make on a phone. We also saw, I think it was Olivia Rodrigo, who my daughter likes very, very much, as soon as the Apple iPhone 15 Pro launched. I think her video was filmed on that. But seeing an actual Apple product launch filmed on an iPhone took a lot of conversation out of the internet. And Apple came out with a making of video, of course they did, a couple of days later. Jim, we were talking about high-end filmmaking as well as the accessible stuff as well, depending upon your choice of camera. What did you make of what Apple did with that video of the launch itself and then the making of behind it?
Well, I think first of all, I think it's a brilliant piece of promotion. I also think, and here's a first, we've all got the EU to thank, because if the EU hadn't forced Apple to replace their Lightning connector with a USB-C, none of this would be happening. And there's the irony. That's what the EU have done for you. They brought smartphone proper filmmaking to you, because what that change has done is it's enabled Apple to actually have proper connectivity to an SSD.
Yes.
So
which enables
ProRes to go straight there, because there's been a lot of bottlenecks in terms of how you record ProRes on your smartphone, on your iPhone. But having that USB-C is actually enabling us to put little SSDs on the back and little holders. And you're absolutely right, create really quite amazing image. I mean, if you look at that behind the scenes film, you'll see 400 people and lighting and cranes and movement and gimbals and all sorts of things. It's actually quite great. It's a great thing to see, to kind of decode the craft of how they made all of that. and then you'll see a tiny phone right at the end, on the end of the crane.
Well, this is the Franken rig that I was
Yeah.
talking about as well. And I've been involved in this smartphone videography, mobile journalism, we've called it, movement for maybe about 10 years or so. But to see that little phone, I don't think I've ever seen as large a production built around a smartphone as I had there. And you mentioned the lighting. There is a lot of lighting.
There's a lot of lighting
there.
because it's all about the other stuff. It's all about the lighting, the movement. What we've been able to do, though, I must just give a quick note to Blackmagic, because they've brought out a free app, and it's not often that I try a free app that's worth it. But what they've done is they've simplified the interface so that you can change your frame rates. You can, and I think it's a fantastic enabling app. I mean, I met some film students when I was at Camera Image in Poland. I went there recently, and I said, try it. They loved it because they could learn about frame rates. They could put it on their phone and shoot stuff straight away. And it was incredibly enabling that, you could see that. You could also bypass, because you can put it externally, you can bypass the Achilles heel of the phone, which has been over sharpening and all of that kind of down compression that they do in the phone. It's the ability of an app like that, the phone, and the external recording via the USB-C to an external SSD. Suddenly, you're absolutely right. Are we all putting iPhones as a wide B cam on top of our other cameras? Because if you're in a bind, you can now color it. You can put a LUT on it. You can do all sorts of things that would have been actually unthinkable when we were even at the iPhone 14. So it has been a big change.
Yes, the Blackmagic app that launched at NAB, I think, just a few weeks before. It's certainly not the first pro video app. I'm thinking of the likes of Filmic Pro, which has been around for a very long time, available on Android as well.
But they went to a subscription model, and there's a lesson here.
Yes.
There's a lesson here for all sorts of people.
A lot of its user base.
Yeah. I mean, Blackmagic are disruptive in that way, in many different ways. And in this sense, I think it's the right app, at the time for that phone. It's not replacing another camera, because you can't really put many lenses on it. You can screw some lenses on the front. You can put a sort of telephoto. You can kind of fix NDs, because obviously NDs are a problem on such a small flat device. You have to have a way of doing that if you want to keep to 25-50. But it's a really interesting step forward. I think it increases everyone's interest in filmmaking, because...
So you've shot a job on a smartphone.
I've done jobs in the past for Samsung launching their phones, and I had to shoot the entire job on the phone. So the answer is yes. But the iPhones, I mean, they've also been used. I think there's a company called, is it Akason, who do, you can turn the iPhone into a monitor now on your camera.
So with iOS 17, it accepts input. So you can use your iPad as an external monitor.
Because they're incredible screens. And so these are devices with incredible screens, better and better cameras. You do need an app that enables that and enables the manual control that you actually want to do as a filmmaker, which comes down actually to frame rates, shutter angle, and also being able to record it with a color profile that allows it not to be crushed in camera. I think that's what people often forget. I always think of it, if you think of your arms out wide as being dynamic range, as wide as you go, and you think of your delivery, if you crush it, if you bring those hands in and you crush that dynamic range in camera, you can't put your arms out wide again. Once it's crushed, it's crushed. So there's a reason why we use flatter profiles, why we shoot in log sometimes, is because, I know it's kind of a silly visual gag, but it's for people to understand that if you crush it down, if you make it brittle, if you over sharpen it, I always have -4 on my Fujis, bring the sharpening down. You want to have a nice flat egg that you can then apply or treat, which has a wide gamut, which hasn't clipped the highlights. And that's the first time with this iPhone 15 that we've been given a glimpse, perhaps, of what's coming in 5 years' time. I'm intrigued with what Apple do as a company in that space. It's very interesting. It's really interesting to see how the devices change. Maybe they'll have a flying one that floats behind our shoulder next, captures it all.
I think we're going to be wearing these cameras on our face with the Vision Pro that will be launching early in 2024.
Yes, you're right.
If the idea of slapping a camera on your face excites you, then, well, stay tuned, because I'm sure if Apple or anyone else comes out with any compelling cameras that do that, we will be covering them here on the show. But that is all that we have time for this month, and indeed for this year. But we will be back on the first Thursday of 2024 when Gavin Hoey will be joining us in the news hot seat. A reminder that tickets are now on sale for the photography and video show at the NEC in Birmingham, England from the 16th to the 19th of March. All of your favourite brands will be there. Your favourite speakers too, including Jim. You will be there at the show.
Astonishing but true.
Also just announced are Photoshop legend Scott Kelby and Adobe principal evangelist Julianne Coast. Head over to photographyshow.com to find out more and bag your tickets. If you enjoyed the show, then please do all of the things that podcasts normally ask you to do. Hit subscribe, tell your friends, share with your local camera club, and hey, even leave us a review. There are show deals, giveaways, and competitions galore over on the socials this Christmas. And very shortly, we'll be announcing our Emerging Artist Award and CreatorCon Star Creator competition. Look us up over there. We're on Insta at The Photography Show, and search us up on Facebook too. Jim, jolly good of you to join us this month. Where can people keep up with what you get up to?
Well, that's very interesting because I'm terrible at social media. They can come and see me at the show, and I'm happy to talk about any topic, literally, that we've discussed. It's been a very enjoyable process. Thank you very much.
And remember, you can go and see Jim at the show if you want to vent your frustration at him claiming that photography is a day off. Buy your tickets 16th to the 19th of March and go and confront Jim. I will be your bodyguard, Jim, I promise.
They're going to throw buns and cakes at me. It's not good.
Maybe they'll throw lenses instead. That could be a good thing or a bad thing. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you all for joining us. Until next time, bye-bye.
Bye.